Hello everybody, you're listening to Chris Hatting, researcher at the Free Market Foundation. Thank you very much for joining me on my latest solo podcast. I'm sure you're all well aware of the tragedy that happened in France this past week on Monday night. The Notre Dame Cathedral was engulfed in flames, and I'm sure a lot of you watched live either on TV or on any of the streams on YouTube as the spire came down. Luckily, they managed to contain a lot of the fire and save a lot of the artifacts and paintings and a lot of valuable artifacts in that cathedral. Regardless of your religious affiliation or cultural affiliation, I think the fact that so many of us were watching all of the sadness displayed on social media shows you that there was something that we all value in the cathedral. It might be different things that we identify that we valued, but it was sort of an example of a common humanity. Sometimes these things, they often happen with sports, but also with culture that transcends the sort of national boundaries and these sorts of things. Now, you might think this is a bit of a random topic to talk about on a podcast. It's usually to do with economics and politics and philosophy, but I feel that you can still take out strands of all those things in what happened on Monday in France. And I specifically want to focus on the idea of value of investment and of long-term planning. We know that the cathedral was built over many years. The people who started building it, they didn't see it finished. Not even their children saw it finished. It took decades and decades and many generations to finish such a grand piece of architecture. And that's, for the people who started it, it shows you something about what they valued, what was important to them. They knew probably that they wouldn't ever see the end of it, but they still felt it was important enough to them. It brought meaning into their lives to be part of something that they saw as important. Now, we often hear the charge against capitalism about short-termism, consumerism, greediness, that kind of thing, how capitalists and businessmen and the West in general is so short-termist, and we all just want to accumulate things and we just want to consume as much as we want. Now, while I don't have a problem with materialism in and of itself, I think it's up to each person to decide if they want to accumulate a lot of wealth and goods, if they gain value from it. I think that we also should talk a bit about and reinforce the importance of investment and long-term investment. Now, whether you're going to have children or not one day, you surely want to live well in your old age. And nowadays, I think most of us don't invest long-term. Economies can't grow without investment, whether it's foreign or domestic investment. You need wealth to accumulate for people to have the resources to build factories and buildings and businesses. Investors will invest in startups. You wouldn't have seen the growth in Silicon Valley without millionaires investing their money in that specific industry. So there's a lot to be said for the idea of long-term investment. I think South Africa especially needs this probably much more now than ever, and yet the government is pursuing a lot of policies which drive away investment. For example, expropriation without compensation. You cannot think long-term, you cannot build anything long-term if the government can come in at any point and seize your property and your wealth. You cannot be secure in what you build. You'll never be able to think long-term, never mind act long-term, if, for example, you know that the wealth you accumulate, the home that you build for yourself and your family, is never secure. So these sorts of policies we definitely need to fight. We need to make sure that we speak out strongly and vehemently against anything that threatens both personal and corporate investment. Just to back to the topic of the cathedral. If you again think of something grand, and it's easy to visualize this huge cathedral, and we all saw the pictures and the videos. A lot of people have been there. They post their photos. It's very tangible, but in that same way, we need to think of investment as very tangible as well. Without that investment, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we consider progress nowadays. I don't think we're ever going to see a cathedral, sort of the nature of and the grandeur of Notre Dame in our lifetime. But people, that's just, it shows you the more individualistic course that societies in general have taken, and people investing in their own lives, which I consider moral and good and a definite sign of progress. But those investments mean nothing if they're not safe from both theft and seizure by private people and by the government. So yeah, I think there's always, with these tragedies, if you consider the fire this week, you consider things like such as 9/11, other bombings, these sorts of things, as difficult and painful as they are, we can probably learn something from all of them, as hard as it is to talk about. We're all obviously very saddened by what happened in France, but I think it's important to take away what we can from it. I don't think we would all be as upset if we didn't all identify something with traditions and sort of long-term thinking and planning for the future. If it had been something that had been built overnight, I don't think it would have carried the same gravitas if it had burnt down. We all realize and recognize the value in things that take time to build, and that's the beauty and, I guess, the responsibility of individual freedom and individual responsibility. It takes a while to figure out your own personal values, your own goals in life, and that's your responsibility. We often like talking about freedom, but that means very little if people don't take control of their lives and take responsibility for it and plan for their lives, plan for their children's lives, maybe their grandchildren, if they're lucky enough to be alive when their grandchildren are born. Freedom means very little if it's sort of, I guess, hedonistically applied. If you focus on pleasure maximization, if you just focus on increasing your pleasure in the moment, sort of hour by hour, I don't think you'll have a long-term value-driven life. So as scary as that thought is, we need to make sure that we take responsibility for our own lives. Very often, sort of socialist, communist, fascist, any collectivist government, they purport to have the best interests of the people in mind, and that's how they justify their social spending, their grand utopian plans, which infringe on individual rights because they see themselves as the caretaker of people. Well, I think we need to take back that from the state. We need to take care of ourselves, and if we choose to, we can then take care of each other. Any enforced charity by the government, I don't think, is charity. Charity should always be voluntary. If it's enforced, it loses any moral value, any sort of moral credit you can gain from it. Yeah, and we need to take back some of that control. I think many people are in bad situations and they're not capable of that. But I think then, if people in society choose to establish charities and religious organizations and these sorts of things, then that's their complete right if they choose to do so. It should not be within the realm of government to tell us for whom we should care and what we should invest in and what we should look after. These should all be individual choices. So, just to sum up, as I've mentioned once, it's difficult to look at these tragedies such as what happened to the cathedral in France and think about them and analyze them. We sometimes just want to sit with the pain, and that's also good. You can't sort of move past something if you don't acknowledge the pain and deal with it, but then you should also try and figure out what you can learn from it. And I think especially with this, we can learn something about the importance of investment and long-term planning, and just considering the future, considering how our actions today will impact our future selves and what we can do. Obviously the future is uncertain, but there's always ways in which we can plan and try and handle whatever the future throws at us in the best possible way. So thank you very much for joining me again. I hope that you all have a good long weekend, a relaxing long weekend, whether you celebrate Easter or not. I hope that you get to spend some time on things that you value, that are important to you. Maybe plan some things for the next month or the next year. Spend some time with your family. and I'll talk to you guys again next week. Cheers.